be like, wow.
Yeah. Well, that's, you know,
it's the pocket.
Hey guys, this is Russ and Ryan from American Musical Supply. We're down in Sayreville, New Jersey at Starland Ballroom. We got to meet with Pat and Nuno from Extreme. They're playing here tonight with Living Color. For those of you out there who bought the new album from Extreme, 6, this is the gorilla from the cover. He's touching me.
First and foremost, we want to congratulate you on your new album. Your 6 is the 6th studio album. It is absolutely fantastic. We have listened to every single track, and what I get most out of it is your energy. Is as if you are 20 years old doing first album and you're just being unleashed to do your thing. Can you just give us like some backstory as to what led to the songwriting process of those tracks on 6 studio
It's
albums?
just the end of the interview right there. I mean, why would we want to talk about anything else?
It really worked out well.
Love the album. It's brilliant. It's genius. And let's go. Buy everything we're using. Well, look, the recording, a lot of people are saying like, man, 15 years or obviously minus a few of the Handmaid's Tale years, pandemic years. And then but the album itself probably, if you add it up, it took the same length as an album takes to record. It didn't take 15 years to record the album. It's just that we probably had like 3 albums worth of material. The guys kept coming out to LA, and we would do a crop of songs, and then we'd write another crop of songs or record another crop of songs. But I think we always had a kind of a bar that we set a bar that is kind of simple. It's just like you really have to be super proud and super excited to share your music with anybody, even if it's your brother or it's your family member, or if it's Tom Morello that you happen to know. Like, sure. Once you have that feeling of like, would you play these songs in front of your peers, then you kind of know you got something there and you're ready to go. So we really didn't have that feeling, I think until right around, I want to say like 2017 or 18 when we started writing and working on a crop of songs like Rise. And
how many songs did you have in the hopper? Like kind of when it came, did you have to boil it down to the track list?
We probably had about like 30, 40, 50 tracks.
Did you really?
But the way I think we've always worked is like we all have our favorites, and we could have a favorite, bass part or a solo or anything else. But I think the way we always end up choosing what ends up on the album is not what's going on the album. If there's 3 or 4 songs fighting for one position, which they usually are, and it's usually by feel. If there's a heavier track, there's usually another 2, 3, 4 heavier tracks that are fighting for that third slot. But the way I think we end up deciding the actual curation of the album is it's not what we want on there, it's what can't we take off.
Sure.
If that makes any sense. Because, a lot of the stuff we're fans of, and it'd be great to have this track or that track, but I think it's the ones where we're like, okay, that really, the album itself kind of really needs it. So I think it's definitely an album-orientated band in the sense of like, we don't sit there and write singles or think about, oh, we need those 3 singles and we need 4 singles. We just say like, what's the opener?
Well, I've heard you say like to the extent that, you write for yourself in like other interviews, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because what happens is, from what I'm gathering from what you've shared, is that you write for you guys and the love of the music, and then if and when that hits the public and they respond to it, and you're getting that response. So I'm sure that's like the rewarding feeling that it's like, oh, that's great. The fans love it, but you wrote it because you enjoyed the music. Because you're covering eclectic ground. You get Hurricane, that's super acoustic, and it's beautiful. Then
We've never done that before.
Right.
What do you mean?
No, but the point is, you're right. It's like when you say selfish, it's. I heard Pete Townsend when I was living back in Mass was that. He was on the radio, and Roger Daltrey, I think, was on before him different times. And I remember sitting in the car, and Townsend came on, and they were saying, hey, we spoke to Roger, and Roger was saying he's super excited. You guys are coming back for their like 4th farewell tour or whatever it was. But he said, he said you're coming back and doing this for the fans. And Townsend just went, what?
Yeah.
He goes, he's lying.
Right.
We don't do this for the fans. We love our fans. We can't wait to share the music, but we have to do it for us first. And it has to be selfish, as self-centered as possible. Imagine us in the studio trying to write, I wonder if they're going to like this, or I wonder if they want to hear another More Than Words, or if they want, or what the label wants. I think true artists and true bands have to go in and like be their own worst, critics, in the sense of like, are you buying this? Are you feeling it? From cutting a bass track to a vocal to a hi-hat pattern.
Right.
Where like, everything has to be like, man, this is feeling great. So that way, the success of it is mastering the album.
Yep.
You know, I remember sending these guys, like when we were in the mastering studio in LA, and just like the excitement of just like, wow, here's the track on vinyl when they were cutting cutting just a sample of it. And I think that's success, because after that, it's just a bonus. If everybody loves it, great. And even if they don't like it or hate it, great. Yep. It's like, we don't want to sit there and question, oh, we should have done this, or we could have done that, or we should have done that track. You got to really be that self-centered. And I think true artists are. I mean, how many times have we picked up an album, you know, back in the day, Rush, or even a Van Halen album, or, you know, a Queen album, where, you know, for me, like a Radiohead album where you're such a big fan and you like first put it on and you're like,
kind of scratching your head a little bit.
I don't know if I like this.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's my favorite thing, but if you don't have that affair with it, it's not a one listen now, like playlisting like you do now. You listen to it once, you're like, next track.
Yep.
I think you have to have a bit of, if you're a fan of the band, you got to give them at least that benefit of the doubt. Like, let me listen to this 3 or 4 times. And how many times after that you're like, I can't get this CD out
of your brain.
For a year straight you're listening to it, like a Yes album or something, where you're like, I don't know if this really sounds like Yes, you know? But I think that's what the beauty of Queen, and even Van Halen, and even the bands that we love, Zeppelin, going from Zepp 2 to Zepp 3, where people were like, what the fuck? Acoustic, like a 2/3 acoustic. And a lot of people were upset, but I was like, hell yeah. You know, so I think,
it's one of my favorites.
I think with Extreme, the fans are always expect the unexpected. And that's why, you know, when you're reading comments and people are like, this doesn't sound like Extreme, or that sounds like Extreme, it makes me laugh, because it's like, wow, you're going to tell the band what sounds like Extreme. Right. Bottom line with Extreme is that you do whatever you do at the time, wherever you're feeling at the time. Even the stuff that we were doing 2 years before we kind of got onto these songs were very different. Mm-hmm. The songs were very different and a little bit more, I don't know, like even a bit more bluesy at times, or a bit more rock and roll. So, you know, you have to do it for yourself, like you said. I could have just said that from the beginning. You could have edited all that.
But it's pretty much anything goes with a band like this, in the sense that you guys can do an acoustic thing, you can do a bluesy thing, you can rock, you never seem to follow the trend. You weren't doing a grunge thing, you weren't doing, you know, something a little more modern. It always sounded like you guys.
We get influenced by that stuff, though. I think we do get influenced by the 90s and Stone Temple Pilots, bands that we love, and even Nirvana and stuff like that. It's not, I think all bands in their era, I remember listening, you know, to Beatles interviews when they were just trying to keep up with the Beach Boys, and the Beach Boys were loving the Beatles, and you're like, wait, what's going on here? And I think all artists are aware of what the artists are doing, what Bowie was doing at the time, you know, versus, you know, Iggy Pop or whatever it was. You keep tabs, and you do get influenced by it. You know, you don't do it, you don't clone it, and you don't do it on purpose. But even Punchline, I think, was a product of being influenced by 90s stuff and grunge stuff that was coming out. Not that we're a grunge band, but I think the rawness of it and the production of it influences. I think the times always, just like the 80s.
Everything always influences everything.
Yeah, I just like the 80s, when our first 2 albums, or at least our first album, is very different than our second album, I think, as we progress. And then the 3 sides sonically, you know, we're listening to bands. I remember, Pat, I remember distinctly being 2 things that happened. One is when we were about to do 3 sides, you had this car in Florida. What was that car? That hot rod? Old Mustang. And you had a 6 stereo put in it, and you were like, you got to check out this King's X album, which was with Dogman.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And it really kind of f***ed me up, because I'm like, here we are in 3 sides mode, and we're big King's X fans, and he's playing it, and it was so heavy.
And the sonic mix was heavy.
But that even affected you. Like you got at the time, you got to really be careful, especially when you're about to cut an album. Like you scrap the whole thing.
Well, how often do you do that? Do you kind of, when you're actually in the studio, do you kind of like, okay, we can't listen to anything on the outside
we get
now?
into a bit of a bubble. We do.
Yeah. I think this record, it was a different process of, like, the songs were written over a longer period of time than some of the earlier records. Yeah. They were like more like when we were in a rehearsal room or whatever. So this one was done a little bit different, especially, you know, with COVID and everything, everyone on different coasts. And at one point we couldn't even fly to work on it. So it definitely was a little bit of a different process, I think, than the first.
Yeah. Pat's right. It's like, we were always used to, like, okay, for your first album, how old were we when the first album came out?
We were at 20, 18, 19,
so your first
20.
album always takes 20 years to make.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's that. And then,
what do you do for an encore?
And then it's like, okay, you got 6, 8, 9 months, a year to tour. So we were always writing on tour. Everything we did, we always had the next album ready by the time we finished the tour. We wrote all 3 sides, was always in dressing rooms, hotel rooms. We had, 2 hotel rooms side by side with an electronic drum kit and, bass and 8-track and all
How
this
do you work
stuff.
out your vocals? Your albums kind of consistently have such rich vocal textures at times. It's either the 3 of you are going and there's different layers, or even like just you and Gary. The new album is a great example where there's times where it seems like you're grabbing the lead at the beginning of like The Mask, and then he comes in, and then
it's very natural. We never map out like, I was looking at the set list, with Gary out there before we went on, and I was just like looking at it, and I'm just looking at all the BVs that me and Pat do, like every song. There's not even a break really where we're like, oh, we step off the mic. And
I think there's one song I don't sing backgrounds in the whole set.
Really?
Yeah.
There's one? Which one's that?
Take Us Alive.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that was the one I die on. I died through.
I think we all have different range of our voices. So from the very beginning, it was always like, okay, you sing the lower harmony, I'll sing the stuff on top.
You are the high, like you're the cold-hearted.
We call him Captain Healy.
I learned how to sing along to Van Halen records. So
you're Michael Anthony.
I'll sing the Mike Anthony.
He can learn whatever he wants, but you were born with the range that you have. Gary is perfectly in the middle, Pat's up here, and I'm just underneath. Like,
that's usually just how it works out, just by where our range is.
Really organic, and we were very lucky to
just fell into it.
It was like very chordal, like there were those octaves, and so every time I'd write these crazy melodies or harmonies, like it wasn't an issue because he could hit whatever upstairs, and I was like, could go low and.
And we always grew up listening to bands with the big harmonies, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Queen, Van Halen, and
absolutely.
Beatles.
And
Yeah, so
yes, all of them.
it's just all in our kind of DNA, having a lot of vocals.
And I think that kind of comes through. I think back to your initial question where, you're saying, how's a band that's been around as long as you guys sound so revitalized and fresh and like you're doing it for the first time? And I think it comes down to the fact that you're just fans of music, first and foremost.
Yeah, and I think you got to be true to yourself where you're at. It's hard to be this age and still have fire for anything that you've been doing for nearly 40 years now. Think about it. I don't give a fuck if it's what you love to do or not.
Sure.
After a while, you're like,
You're gonna burn
okay, and you go through these ups and downs and periods, and I think you have to somehow find that passion and that fire. And I think one thing that always kept us grounded in that way and always kept us reminded us is we could have we could not record an album, we could break up, we could get back together, we could do whatever. But whenever we get on stage, it was like, oh, that's why we do it.
Yeah.
And that's when we're really, the brotherhood's there. And that's really why we did it in the first place. It wasn't necessarily record albums. I don't like recording albums personally. It's a pain in the ass.
Really?
But you're so invested in it.
It's
more tedious, right?
It's tedious and it's a necessary evil.
Sure.
Think about it. You're taking months. You're writing songs for a year. You're doing all this stuff. You write the song. You kind of have in your head right away as you're even writing a riff. And maybe that's my torture. Is like, oh, I already hear the drum groove and I already hear what the drum sound is. And I kind of start hearing even ideas and harmonies. And now you got to go through the pain in the ass of you see the child you want, but now you got to
got to whittle it down.
You got to whittle it down. You got to carry the baby. You got to deliver it. You got to do stuff, and you got to raise it, and then it goes out to the world. As opposed to can we just whatever's up here? Can we just cut it?
I remember seeing an interview recently. Someone was talking about making a record, and they had a chart up on the wall. Drums, bass, guitar,
Whiteboarded
solo, keyboard part, vocal part.
God.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, how uninspiring is that to look and see an open, chalkboard with all these unchecked boxes?
It's clinical,
Sucks all the life out of it.
Yeah, it just kind of makes you go, shit, I'm climbing this uphill battle to fill all these little squares in.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you got to be into wanting to record and, really the passion for the music.
Sure.
Yeah, it's the new song. You're right. It's the new songs that excite you to get through it. But nobody ever was like, oh yeah, we're going to go and fucking do an album. Nobody. I don't care.
You don't care who they are.
No,
Not even Prince, maybe, or
I think
it seems like he was always in the
Dan?
studio.
Yeah, he's in the studio because he's prolific.
Yeah,
but
he's
if you
driving
ask
him nuts.
Prince, you see Prince on stage.
Yeah, that's
you
where
see him in the studio.
That's his
I
home.
guarantee you, it's not
Different
the same
guy.
thing. Because
Plus, I don't think he'd sit there and go, oh, I'm going to go in to write a record. He just kept writing.
He was compelled to do it.
Let me pick 12 songs out of that huge pile there.
Right.
And,
that's his family's decision
he's
now.
prolific, and that's what he does. Where he had a studio in his space and in his house and everything else. Where we were tour and we go straight into doing an album, go to a studio. We barely took time off to do anything. So it's always a process because you never really get to where you want to go on an album. It never happens. In your head and what it sounds like and what you dream it's going to be, you're lucky if you get to 70 to 80% of it and you win. Because you never actually finish an album. You just abandon the album.
Wow.
You know?
All right.
I like
So is that why the gear doesn't change as much for you? I mean, it seems like your rig has been pretty consistent for about 30 years. It's like, all right, that's locked in. Now I can just concentrate on making music. Or do I not know? You're kind of, he's like, no, he's got 50 guitars.
We're not really like these, like people always ask us, have you checked out this fractal? Have
Sure,
you checked out
yeah.
this pedal?
We're like, no.
But we're like, no, I mean, I kind of like what I use. And he, obviously is doing, he knows what he likes and knows what to, I heard a story about Angus Young one time where he has everything dialed in and like he was walking by his road crew and they're like changing speakers. And he's like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we want to try these new Celestians in your cabs. He goes,
why?
Well, did I blow the old ones? and they go like, no. Then he goes, put them back. So, you know what you like and you like what you use.
Yeah.
And like, we're not like these gearheads that like, are always searching for something that we...
But that's rare because the illusion of choice that everyone has. I mean, that's what we do. We want people to buy as much gear as they can.
Yeah, but I think that what Pat's saying is like you actually do have. For me, it's always been like Pat's also always had a distinct bass sound. Mm-hmm. He can play with his fingers and he can play with a pick, but there's always like, you want to know it's that guy when he plays. You want to know it's Chris Squire when he plays. You want to know it's Geddy Lee when he plays.
Sure.
You want to know when it's John Paul Jones,
Well, you put me in a category of some
That's some heavy hitters right there, man.
You're done. You can head out.
That's some love.
but that's really important for a band. It's a band. It's a band first.
Sure.
And there's a big difference, and I don't mean this, I tend to always open my mouth too much, but there's a big difference between just being a musician and being an artist. And I think sometimes as a musician, when you're younger and you're first starting and you're becoming a musician, because you have to grow into becoming. You don't wake up as an artist one day.
Right.
You have to
don't?
learn no, you don't. You have to learn the instrument, and then there's a point where you continue as a musician, which is fine, and you become, you're a player. And great players and amazing players. But then there's a point where you all of a sudden, I don't know why this happens or what happens and it's a lot of the music that you grow up on, that you stop playing. You literally stop playing. Like, I don't look at myself anymore as a guitar player anymore.
It just comes out.
It looks like, I feel like I'm part of a band, and we're a band, and we do these songs together that I know will not sound like a band unless he's doing it, and he's doing it. Like, I can't tell you how many times when all this shit was leaked with the isolated tracks that everybody has from all the albums that came out, right? You pull apart those things, even the mighty Edward Van Halen.
Oh, forget it.
You pull apart like Hot for Teacher solo, and you realize
So dry, clean. Yeah.
it's great. It's the same as you always heard, but how more human it sounds without the rhythm section.
Yep.
It's the same thing when the Rise solo came out, and everybody's like, oh my God, listen to this solo. It's like, it's Raise the Bar. I'm like, oh my God, I've been doing that same sort of muted thing since like 1993 and everything. And it's a decent solo, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is, like, if I remember how everybody sits now and they sit in front of their phones and they post things, and it's always like getting me aside and they say like, hey, do a teaser, give them a bit of the Rise solo before the Rise solo comes out.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you right now that if I sat in that chair in the studio and I played the exact same solo without the band, without the rhythm section, without the energy, without the vocals behind it, without it coming from the chorus and the excitement and that drop, that ba-ba coming out, that Zeppelin,
it's a band effort.
It's the solo just sounds like, it's playing guitar. We always knew he's shredding. We always knew he did that stuff.
Sure.
Big deal. I'm telling you don't get the views, you don't get the likes, you don't get it. You'd be like, okay, there's Nuno shredding in the studio. Be like, wow.
Yeah. Well, that's,
it's the pocket.
And let's face
it's
it,
everything.
we all know there are guitar players out there that can, that are amazing, you jaw-dropping, but then you stick them into a band situation.
and they clam up.
And they're lost. They gave and tapped their foot to keep time with the band.
Yeah.
You're like,
It's a pocket. It's everything.
It's like
It's a
all
pocket.
about being in a band. It's
Yeah.
not,
If there's an old story about the Kinks where, everyone wants to know who played the solo to You Really Got Me. And it's like, was it Jimmy Page and Dave Davies is like, I did. And then there was someone who said, who cares? The solo is great. Who played the whole song? Because that's the song.
Yeah.
Well,
without the song, it doesn't matter.
But you brought up a good point. The bands that guitar players that I've always loved, and I think it's like speaking on behalf of Pat, is like the guitar players we always loved were in great bands.
Of course.
Because
Good point.
they're it limited them. They had to play the song. And they had to be creative rhythmically. I mean, Edward changed the game. Eddie's a great guitar player, but he changed the game, as a soloist, of course, but the reason he's the greatest of all time for me is because he didn't just raise the solo playing, he raised the rhythm playing. Sure. And it was a whole
There was a whole other 3 minutes
that before Edward, we were listening to greats like Jimmy Page and Brian, everybody else, and they'd play rhythm, and then they'd take a solo when it came to the solo. And then
Punch
it was
it in, yeah. Now I'm doing the whole thing.
I'm gonna do fills where their drum fills are supposed to be. I'm gonna do fills. I'm gonna answer the vocal and do some things in between. And you're like, holy shit. There's a whole other 3 minutes here that really makes the guitar player go from here to there. And that's what I mean by visionary artists and creativity. A lot of the stuff that Edward placed for the song, the same guy that you were sitting there and you dropped the needle and you'd go like eruption, you're like, oh my God.
It blows your head off.
What the fuck's going on? But all of a sudden you go to Ain't Talking About Love.
Right.
You're still going, what the fuck, on that. And then it takes the solo, and you're like, is that the same guy?
Right.
He played for the song. It's just
that was it. It served
an
the
open
song.
string and a single note that a beginner could almost do.
I can do it.
But that's my point.
I'll show you outside.
My point is musicians play for themselves mostly, I believe. Like I used to. I used to wank off all day, and you didn't care what the song was going on.
Where do you see you made that transition?
I think the transition is where you decide where your journey, you're on this road and you can be a great musician and you can be a great musician and you'll be playing in great bands and you might even have original bands and have success doing it. That's not what I'm saying. And you might even be hired to play with great bands and great artists. But when you take that right or left turn where it's like, there's a burning building over here and you're going to go there instead because everybody's going this way.
Right.
That's a harder road.
Yeah.
You're going to decide to do original music and play in clubs and believe you're going to get a record deal.
Right.
Good luck. We grew up with bands that we still feel might be better than us and better songwriters. And the Boston scene was insane with amazing bands and talent. But it's like when you decide to go that road, the stars have to align at some point. It's not just like, how do you get a record deal? How do you do this? There's so much.
It goes back to his whiteboard, chalkboard thing. You can't look at that and go, this is the path.
People say, how do I do that? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Songs, great manager, gigs, who's booking the band, how do you get an audience in there? We used to pay to play. We used to go to the club. They would never pay us money to go to the club. We give them $200 and they give us the tickets.
Sure.
And then we'd have to go and sell the
Yeah,
tickets.
That sounds about right.
To get people in there. But that's how we hustled to get people in there to start getting somebody to notice. So my point is, are you willing?
Yeah, was the desire
sacrifice?
there.
Are you willing to sleep in the rehearsal space? Are you willing to do what we all did, was quit our jobs?
Yep.
And eat one meal a day and sleep in a rehearsal space. And when Burger King comes out with the 2 burgers for $1, it's like heaven.
Go now.
We used to say to each other, we got enough for 4 burgers, but no drink.
Go to the
It's a hose.
That was an old Paul Geary, our original
no
drummer
drink.
used to
We have the drive because we can't get a drink. So no, we have just 99 cents for 2 burgers. That changed our lives. But we'd be recording our first, demo, which Pat went to his dad to borrow money to go into the studio, right?
Yeah.
But yet still, there we are, just in the studio, like a proper studio in Rhode Island. But if you open the cabinet where they had like bunk beds in there, and we were just sleeping in there. If you open the cabinet of the food, it was literally like just stacks of that powdered macaroni and cheese, like the one that the mix that
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Oh, it was amazing.
I
wish you could go back to those days.
My dad still talks about that. He says, I never thought I'd see the money back. So he was pretty impressed when we actually paid.
You actually paid back?
It's nice that he believed in you, right?
It was like $5,000 or something.
Something like
crazy.
that. We did
But my point being is, you're taking a risk even doing that. But if you have a vision and you know what the band's going to sound like, and you go in and you know how you're going to cut the tracks and what you want them to sound like, and it's the songs. It's all about songs.
Absolutely.
songs.
That's what we still talk about.
Songs. The reason you listen to Van Halen, Queen, it's not because of just Edward. It's because of the songs.
Yeah.
There's no way. I'm telling you, it's the sum of all parts. Zeppelin, you pull the perfect example. You pull a Bonham out. You pull a John Paul Jones out. My God.
And there was definitely a trend in the era that we came out in the, obviously the late 80s into the 90s. There was a trend where there was amazing guitar solos, but some of the songs were shit. And I'm not going to name names of bands or whatever.
We were going to ask you to do that after.
Yeah, so we'll do that after the cameras
the people were chasing the guitar player.
Of course,
the guitar hero thing, and it didn't add up because.
And you're like, this song is embarrassing.
And great players that we admired, that we learned from and were inspired. But you're like, lyrically or whatever, you're like, okay, this is just punching in the clock to get to the to the guitar
solo.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention our buddies at Shure.
Yeah. With your rigs this year, I mean, you're doing your tour. I know you guys are using Shure fans kind of thick and throughout. So wireless in-ear monitors. You're using it, if I'm not mistaken, wireless in your acoustic.
Yeah.
And your bass all the way.
Wireless, yeah.
Well, that's a good thing about when we use something. the bad news is we might not even be able to tell you what model it is.
Sure.
Because we don't give a you know why?
It goes back to the gear, right?
It's going to amazing.
Right.
If somebody puts something up with like, yes, whatever that is, that's like A/B stuff. And it's not like somebody could tell me, oh, it's a Celestion 75. I'm like, whatever that is,
it sounds good.
There. Don't touch it.
Does it add
ever
something?
Since the beginning, we've used SM58 mics.
Sure. Yep.
So we all know that. But,
even your Banshee video has a Super 55, if I'm not mistaken,
yeah,
right?
Gary, he uses that cool kind of old kind of. So that's like the Frank microphone.
Frank Elvis, right? Yeah.
But
totally.
It was almost like a few gigs ago, someone put some other microphones up for us. I'm like, what the hell is this thing? Where's my 58? So you're just used to, those are tried and true, obviously.
When did you make the transition into like wireless for your bass or your acoustic? Have you been?
I think the first time we probably really were like, oh, we need wireless is when the stages got bigger.
You can't trip.
And when you have a psychopathic singer like Gary, who's
tripping on your cable
and shit and pulling it everywhere and stuff and everything. I mean, I'm still using a cable. And when Pat went, it was the best day for me because then I could use a cable.
Yep.
Because if we go cross stage, then we go back and now we're tied up in our cables. And now
but especially if you're tethered to a microphone on top of it, it's not like you're just playing. You're singing there too, so it's not like you could be running around like crazy. You have to get back to that mic and hit your spot. So in that regard, it's probably a good thing.
And for me, it's always been. Wirelesses are always hard for me because it's the same reason we go back to the question a while ago where it's like, why you use the same stuff. There are players that like want pedals and are really creative. I wish I admire people that do that, like the players that like, wow, they get so many different tones and they use different pedal boards and all this stuff because it's so creative, right? It's really hard to be creative with just what I do. Because you like, okay, then that means the riff's got to be good. It's not like an effect. You can rely on effects and things like that to make it creative, atmospheric. But even though, like I use delay and I use some chorus and stuff like that, but that's pretty much it. And recently a Phase 90, I never used it, but you kind of
have to.
You can't use a Phase 90 when Edward was alive. You go to jail for that. He owns a Phase 90. But the point of the head. And what it is and all that stuff is that for me it's like there has to be as minimal a signal, anything between the fingers, strings, and that head.
Yeah,
that's
makes sense.
Everything to me. Because to me, that's when you know who that is.
Yep.
You're hearing the player.
Warts and all.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's like when you can touch a string and you just make it can just slightly change its tone, or people say, oh my God, like, you make the string sound different is because you have control to do that with your right hand and where you touch. The second you put even a chorus pedal on or even anything else or a phaser, it changes.
Or tons of reverb.
It starts the wah-wah pedal. It starts doing it for you, which is great.
I like that.
Which is great if that's what you want. But finger-wise, it's like, I love when I can hear, even the transition from Edward from those early albums to when he started splitting the chorus and everything.
Fair warning.
But Forewarning, he was still mostly playing. He was starting to do a little bit of chorus, but I'm talking about like probably the Hey Guy.
Sure. Yeah.
And even a little bit on Diver Down, stuff like that. But really the Hey Guy is like, all right, I'm splitting stereo sound. And it's great for those albums and everything else. But I heard less of him. I could tell his playing and his creativity and even his vibrato. But it was interesting how revealing his other sound was to him in a bad way. I remember having a conversation and I asked him about the first two. I was like, oh my God, really? Horrible guitar sounds on Van Halen 1 and 2.
Oh.
You know what I mean? It was like because
only he can say that.
You know why? You know why? Because of how like he rang out a chord, you could hear every little thing. He hit a harmonic, you could hear every little thing.
You could hear the strings.
And that, for some people, is a nightmare. But for people like him that have that magic, and that's what I grew up on, why I always wanted to like, man, can I get to that point where it's like you don't have to color what you're doing to hide behind it?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I remember you saying, too, you played through his rig, and he was like,
sounds like me.
I'm gonna come play through Ed's rig, and I'm gonna sound like him and have his sound. Be like, I was kind of disappointed that I still sounded like me.
Nightmare.
I'm sure it was awful. Yeah.
And if you're not gonna sound like him with his strings, his DNA still on the string,
right?
I was just listening to it right before I played. I'm like, there he is, and then I picked it up, and I'm like.
It really is all in here.
It's here, man. It's everything that you do there. I mean, even when I was on the Gen X tour, I forced everybody to like at one sound. I'm like, all right, let's swap rigs. And it was amazing how everybody still sounded like
themselves.
Everybody. Like Yngwie playing my guitar or me going through Zach's rig. Like I'm thinking I'm going to have that big vibrato.
Squeal,
Nope, that didn't happen. And Vi as well. I mean, Vi's got his thing with everybody. I don't think anybody played Toast and Drink because nobody could figure it out.
It's a head scratcher.
Well, there's no turn it on.
Actual amp involved, I think. Yeah.
Well,
But yeah.
we very much appreciate you guys taking the time. I got one last question. It's kind of a silly one. We'll just end on. Why are all the songs on the new album have capital letters? Is there any logic that went behind that?
You know, I have always, that's got to be a high school dropout that did that myself. Because we always, to me, it's like when something needs to stick out, when I'm doing a lyric sheet or I'm writing lyrics, I always put the title in capitals.
Sure.
You don't want to see it like the rest of the song. You just put it in caps. So then when we started doing it, I was mastering, like, why are these people putting, the song looks
yelling?
So much weaker and less, so much weaker and less important. Like when it's like, oh, you know, there's like Banshee with a little A. And I'm like, no, it's Banshee, man. So I didn't know that was a thing. And people kept asking me, like, why is everything capital? I'm like, first of all, who gives a Second of all, I had no idea that it was supposed to be or normally.
So now we're gonna try to get them to change the font too.
Exactly.
Size. Good luck.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you guys for coming out and sitting down.
Appreciate it. Did we add anything to what you guys wanted to say?
Well, we didn't want to ask the same old questions you keep getting asked.
Yeah.
You know, the rumor around, you guys should call the next album Van Halen 4. That's what I wanted to say, but nobody liked that idea.
4.
You could do it. Do it. I'll call Wolfgang. We'll get it to happen. All right, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you like monkeys or gorillas or extreme, hit like, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and we'll have more content coming to you soon from American Musical Supply.